I would like to welcome the presence of His Excellency, Mr. Vuk Jeremic, my dear friend, the President of the General Assembly. I appreciate his presence here with us today. It reflects the importance he attaches to support the ongoing efforts to revitalize the General Assembly. In this context, I recall your introductory remarks, Mr. President, at the General Assembly debate on revitalization on October 11, 2012, and I quote, "When you mentioned the speed of the changes taking place outside these walls is increasingly outpacing the tempo of the changes we are able to agree upon in this building. To retain the capacity to change the world for the better, we will need to find the strength to keep changing ourselves. I'm afraid that we are confronted with the choice of either adapting to the new times or simply being left behind to watch the gap between our duties and our capabilities widen by the day." This was an inspiring statement, and building on these words by the President of the GA, I invite His Excellency, the President, Mr. Vuk Jeremic, to share with us his views regarding the revitalization of the work of the Assembly. Please.
Thank you very much, my good friend. Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to address the first meeting of the ad hoc working group on the revitalization of the work of the General Assembly. I've asked my good friend, His Excellency Mr. Mutaz Ahmedin Khalil, the permanent representative of Egypt and one of the ablest diplomats I have met in my career so far, to lead in this critical endeavor. Ambassador Khalil has proposed a plan of work organized into 4 clusters. I strongly support this framework, and I respectfully urge the member states to actively engage in the process. The first cluster is focused on the General Assembly's role and responsibilities, as well as its relationship with other principal organs of the United Nations and various regional organizations. The second relates to significant technical matters, such as working methods, implementation of resolutions, and agenda streamlining, in addition to discussing options for more time-conscious and secure balloting in the plenary. The third revolves around the consideration of the role of the General Assembly in the selection of the Secretary General, as well as other executive heads within the UN system. The fourth cluster includes an examination of the functions of the Office of the President of the General Assembly, its relationship with the Secretariat, and ways in which the office's institutional memory can be enhanced. Within this context, the group will also look at options for increasing the assignment of permanent UN staff office of the PGA, as well as its level of funding. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friends, I would like to say this thing loud and clear. I believe that the current apportionment is manifestly inadequate. For most small and medium-sized countries, particularly those from the developing world, this one-year position is perhaps the most important multilateral post for which they have the opportunity to run. In deliberating whether to present a candidature for the PGA, no member state should be constrained by the possible financial implications of victory. In my view, this constitutes an undue burden. In this institution, where each member is equal to every other, all must have an equal opportunity to exercise the duties of the PGA to their best ability, and not their country's capacity to finance them. I therefore respectfully appeal to this group to make a strong recommendation to level the fiscal playing field by calling for a larger allocation of funds from the regular UN budget to be granted to the office of future presidents of the General Assembly. Excellencies, I firmly believe that revitalization is fundamentally about empowering the member states to make the fullest possible use of the broad capacities provided by the Charter to the General Assembly. For decades, the great promise made in 1945 could not be fulfilled in its entirety. Even today, all the aims of the UN's founders have not been fully met. The contemporary world is in the midst of one of the most profound, all-encompassing periods of transformation ever to occur in peacetime. We don't have a clear picture of what it will look like when the dust finally settles. But its contours are starting to come into focus. Nations and peoples across the globe aspire to have a larger say in how their destiny will be shaped. They also seek to exercise a greater independence of action, a result of what I believe are two related factors. First, a resurging devotion to a basic tenet of this organization, and that is sovereign equality. And second, a burgeoning emphasis on its corollary, and that is the universal adherence to accepted principles and norms in the conduct of international relations. These are only some of the reasons why our efforts, I believe, are assuming greater significance so rapidly. Perhaps the most critical one takes as its starting point the fact that last June in Rio de Janeiro, world leaders tasked the General Assembly to assume primary responsibility for conceptualizing a universal transition to sustainability. Excellencies, I'm convinced that this is a strategic issue of first order, one that will frame much of the UN work for decades to come. It is up to member states, and member states alone, to fulfill the mandate of the Future We Want concluding Rio document, to define and adopt the SDGs, agree on options to financing them, and conceive a workable intergovernmental arrangement for monitoring their implementation. In addition, of course, to deciding on actions that need to be taken to complete the MDG process. I think that the international community has rarely done anything quite so complex, and the General Assembly surely never has. Yet this is exactly what we need to do over the next 1,000 days when the clock runs out and the MDGs. I believe that this is the moment, and through this process, to start crafting a new ambitious global framework, at the heart of which will stand the General Assembly. Over the past decade, the General Assembly has recognized the value of thematic debates to the process of revitalization. In Resolution 60/298 of 2006, the General Assembly mandated the President to propose topics, including and indicating that each should revolve around an issue of critical importance. I believe that every thematic debate should be seen as a unique opportunity for member states to exchange views as true equals on a key subject affecting the international community as a whole. I therefore strongly encourage all of you not only to participate, but to speak up, to proudly state one's principal case, and to hear frank and open responses. I believe that there should be no taboo in the General Assembly, and especially in the context of thematic debates. Over the course of this month, 3 of them will be held, and many more to follow in May and June. The first that is coming up will take place on April 10, and we'll examine the role of international criminal justice in reconciliation. 2 decades have passed since the establishment of the inaugural UN Ad Hoc Tribunal, and 10 years since the entry into force of the Rome Statute establishing the ICC. This is the first time a discussion will take place in the plenary to examine long-term impacts of international criminal justice and reconciliation efforts. I hope that we will be able to discuss freely whether there are any lessons to be learned and best practices to be applied in the future. Next, the plenary will come together on April 15 to discuss the UN and global economic governance. This thematic debate will focus on how significant economic actors, including international financial institutions, as well as informal groupings such as the G20, may interact with the rest of the world in the future. I've underscored the fact that the General Assembly can provide a unique platform to exchange views and share information on common economic concerns. This one-day discussion is designed to complement existing international efforts to achieve what a very recent report by the Secretary General defined as a more participatory system of global economic governance. A third thematic debate will be held on April 25 on the peaceful resolution of conflicts in Africa, in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Organization of African Unity, a precursor to the African Union. The occasion will provide the General Assembly with an opportunity to reflect on a remarkable journey the continent has made over the past 5 decades. It will also enable us to take stock of various efforts to address current challenges and point at ways in which the UN can further strengthen its cooperation with African member states and regional organizations in the period before us. Excellencies, the process of revitalization can help lay the foundation for a much-needed grand reorganization of human affairs, which ensure the General Assembly becomes the key source of legitimacy for the international community. In the time ahead, the UN's chief deliberative, policy-making, and representative organ should become a true universal parliament of nations, a conclave of humanity where the world's most important issues are discussed and decisions taken. I believe this is a conditio sine qua non for an international system that aspires to justice. It pledges not only equal rights to all nations, but aims to safeguard their equal dignity as well. Excellencies, in 1961, one of the greatest statesmen of the 20th century, President John F. Kennedy, gave an historic speech before the General Assembly. It is with his words as relevant today as they were spoken more than half a century ago that I would like to come to the conclusion of my remarks. This institution, he said, will either grow to meet the challenges of our age, or it will be gone with the wind, without influence, without force, without respect. Were we to let it die, to enfeeble its vigor, to cripple its powers, we would condemn our future. To make meaningful the moral force of the world community, development has to become a cooperative and not a competitive enterprise. To enable all nations, however diverse in their systems and beliefs, to become, in fact, as well as in law, free and equal nations. Thank you for your attention.